loud. Welcome, everybody. We are going to wait a few minutes to get started. We're glad that you're here for this presentation on the federal budget proposals and impacts on local services and budgets. Welcome again to folks that are just joining us. We're going to wait a few minutes to let folks trickle in, and then we will get started shortly. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. I wanted to confirm that folks could see the slide that's up on the screen. Let's see. Kate, you're running admin. What's the best way to check that?
Shawnee, will you come off mute and tell us if you can see Logan's screen share?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just making sure. Thank you.
Sure.
Perfect. And thank you to Melissa Nixon, who dropped that in the Q&A as well. I still, after many years, am not that good at using Zoom. But I think that we can go ahead and get started since there is a lot of content to cover today. And folks will continue to let folks in as they arrive. Thanks again for being here. My name is Logan Rockefeller Harris. I'm the Director of Research at the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center. And I'm joined today by Todd Warren from Down Home, North Carolina. And the focus of this webinar is on the federal budget proposals that are currently making their way through Congress, and kind of specifically how some of the major cuts that are being proposed would trickle down to affect local governments and local economies. And go ahead and move forward and tell you a little bit about my organization. So the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We work to document and analyze fiscal and economic conditions, along with community leaders, so like folks at down home and North Carolinians who have lived experience of poverty, so that we can advance systemic solutions through public policy that drives anti-racist outcomes. And historically, we've really focused on the state budget and state tax policy and how different tax and budget policies and proposals can either hinder or advance equity in our state. And we're now doing work focused on the federal budget that has kind of expanded the scope of that work. And I say that partly because a lot of this content about the federal budget is actually new to our organization and is shifting frequently. And so it's possible, that some of you will know more about specific aspects of information that we're sharing than we do. And we would love to, hear from you in the Q&A about that. Our agenda for today is I'm going to cover kind of a very quick overview of federal budget proposals and the current timeline that we're working with, and then go over major proposed federal cuts and local impacts with some specific focus on SNAP food assistance, healthcare, and public schools. And then return a bit at the end to the state context and the need to pause state tax cuts in order to prepare our state for things that we believe are likely to get passed at the federal level. And I will then turn it over to Todd to discuss opportunities for action and kind of the importance of folks who are working on the ground in local government and providing local services and local public school systems. The importance of kind of delivering messages from your all's experience to folks, to legislators at the national and state level. We are going to have time held for Q&A at the end, so you're welcome to use the Q&A function to drop questions in throughout the presentation, and we'll plan to, for the most part, probably come back to questions at the end. I will try, if I see a question come up that's really easy to address just in the moment, to just to answer that like right away. So I will do that where possible. And again, I think my caveat is that there may be questions that I don't have the answer to, and I will do our very best to respond with follow-up information that answers those questions as best as possible if we can't answer them in the moment. We are also recording this session and are intending to make the recording available and to follow up with the slides and with other resources that are shared throughout the presentation. So my first step, just want to give a very high-level overview of where we are in this process. And again, things are moving quickly. I do want to emphasize there's an important time to weigh in right now, regardless of whether we have a very short window for action or a potentially slightly longer window for action. But the U.S. House has already passed, its version of a budget bill in May, and currently the U.S. Senate is working to finalize their chamber's version of the bill. And so that's the point that we're currently in. There's some, rules that govern whether whether it's possible for certain things to be passed just on a simple majority in the Senate. And so there are kind of negotiations going on currently to figure out what will go in the final version of that Senate bill. They had been talking about trying to pass that Senate version by the end of this week. So as far as I know, that is still their goal. And then the sort of expedited timeline for this actually passing out of both chambers and then going on to President Trump's desk to be signed would be July 4th. So that's quite soon. The president has indicated that he really wants it to be passed by July 4th. And so that is a possibility. It's also possible that they may need a longer period of time to negotiate and come to agreement on something that both the Senate and the House would be able to pass. And so it's possible that that would get pushed back to August, which is an important date because of the debt ceiling needing to be raised. The actual time, another key date that's not on here is that December is when tax cuts that were passed during Trump's first term would expire. And so that would be, the actual deadline if they wanted to extend those tax cuts, which is a major goal of the proposals from the majority in Congress that I will go over more. So we're kind of, I put that red arrow, we're right, obviously, at the end of June. Currently, the negotiations are kind of ongoing this moment in the Senate. Ultimately, what we've seen so far from the US House and Senate budget proposals is that they're very similar. So in a few places in this presentation, I will talk about differences between them, but largely in terms of their content and impacts, they're very, very similar. And the kind of main elements of them are that they make very large cuts, primarily to SNAP food assistance and to healthcare benefits in order to fund tax cuts that are very disproportionately benefit the wealthiest Americans. So a lot of that is extending those tax cuts that President Trump passed during his first term. I'm going to be talking about various sort of estimates for state level effects. I want to acknowledge that there are a lot of different numbers. There are different ways to sort of estimate these things. Most of what we use comes from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which is a national partner of the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center. And so, we tend to rely on them a lot. But because of some of the uncertainty in these estimates, you may see different numbers like coming from other sources that you're following. And I also want to acknowledge that there are a lot of different ways to talk about the federal budget. You may also have heard about, the reconciliation bill or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which was the technical name of the House's proposal. I tend to just say federal budget when I'm talking about it, but these essentially, all mean the same thing. So if you've been reading something that referred to it as reconciliation, that's, the same content as what I'm talking about. And in terms of, why Congress is proposing like these big cuts for SNAP and SNAP, Medicaid, as well as to the Affordable Care Act, I just want to emphasize that there's a very clear goal that they're making very significant tax cuts that largely benefit wealthy people and are using these cuts to SNAP and Medicaid to offset those tax cuts. The bill is not revenue neutral, so it would still actually lead to significant increases in the deficit. But there's actually a very close relationship. This is from the House bill, for example, that the cuts to SNAP as well as to healthcare programs match up very closely with the amount of money that would revenue that would be lost because of tax cuts that are going to households with incomes over about $500,000. So to get into these cuts in a little bit more detail, and again, I'm trying to give a relatively high-level overview. Feel free to drop questions using the Q&A function. As cuts to SNAP food assistance, which also get called EBT or food stamps, are one major source of that revenue offset for the tax cuts. One of the key ways that they're doing this is to expand work reporting requirements for SNAP benefits, which would have the effect of kicking a bunch of people off of that program. So the program already has work requirements. The federal proposals would increase the age limit for work reporting requirements up to age 64 and include parents of school-aged children for the first time. And so estimates are that up to 375,000 people in our state live in households that could lose at least some food assistance. And I also think it's important to emphasize, and this is something that our state DHHS office has also really been emphasizing, is that there's a pretty clear track record that work reporting requirements for public assistance don't lead to increased employment, but do lead to people, losing access to benefits because of technicalities, red tape that kind of creates new barriers. One major issue is that a lot of low-income people work in low-wage jobs with very unpredictable hours and sort of general instability that they have very little control over, and that often doesn't match up well with the way that their work, there's attempts to track work hours through, to prove eligibility for these programs. But despite this track record of work requirements, those are the plans that we've currently seen in the bill. The other major way that federal funding is getting cut from SNAP is that states would have to pay for a portion of SNAP benefits for the first time in the program's history, which the actual benefits have always been covered by, fully by the federal government. So the amount would depend on some sort of analysis of SNAP error rates, which are sort of discrepancies in payment amounts. But there's an estimated cost based on the most recent data that this could cost over $500 million a year in North Carolina in new costs for the state, because for the first time the state would have to pay for a portion of the benefits that are going to folks. The other shift is that states would be responsible for paying a larger share of the cost of administering the program. So, paying for staff that actually, caseworkers that actually work with people to help them get enrolled, ensuring there are computer systems that can track folks and identify eligibility. Those are likely to become more significantly, more complex with increased work requirements. And in North Carolina, that cost currently falls to counties. So there's, if that cost were to just counties would be asked to pick that up, that could be a significant additional cost being asked of counties. And that's estimated at approximately statewide about $65 million a year currently. There are also pretty limited options for a state to be able to cover these costs. They could either, kind of fork up the money by raising revenue or by cutting other services that they're currently paying for. Try to find a way to decrease SNAP enrollment to reduce the amount of state cost share, which would be challenging because of the way that SNAP is currently structured as an entitlement program with kind of clear federal guidelines about who's about eligibility. Or the state could choose to withdraw completely from the SNAP program, which would mean that about 1.4 million people that are currently enrolled would lose their benefits, which is, I think, the worst case scenario. And in terms of local impacts, clearly, there's impacts for the state budget, but because of the county, counties being responsible for that administrative share, it could put them on the hook for the $65 million in new administrative costs. And we also just know that it's a lot of work to introduce kind of additional paperwork to for new work reporting requirements. So that means additional, staff time dedicated to those, which can shift folks away from other services that they were providing, and also, can just sort of delay operations in general at county DSS offices. I think there's a particular concern among rural offices that are already short-staffed, that there, could be real challenges implementing that. And then there are also kind of cascading impacts to other areas. One major issue is, that SNAP eligibility is used to determine eligibility for free school meals, and as well as whether a school district qualifies for what's called the community eligibility provision threshold, which is the classic name for a government program, and that it's very hard to tell what it means. But this allows the if a large enough percentage of students are enrolled in SNAP, then free school meals can be covered for the entire district or the entire school. And so, with reducing the SNAP enrollment overall, could sort of jeopardize the ease of identifying eligibility for school meals, and then also having districts or schools be able to meet that threshold and that, for that program. I think there's also concern around kind of returning to like just having students need to, or families need to fill out applications, which has been found to be challenging for schools to run, and also to increase stigma around free school meals. There's also likely to be impacts on grocery stores and local economies. So SNAP provides a lot of, there are dollars that go into the local economy. They're spent at local retailers and grocery stores, and there are many sort of especially smaller food retailers that are in rural areas that could be at risk of closure, sort of decreasing access to healthy food for everybody, regardless of their enrollment in the program. I'm next going to move on to discussing Medicaid. And similarly to the work requirement expansions in SNAP, work requirements under these proposals from both the House and the Senate would be placed on adults enrolled in Medicaid for the first time. So there have never before been federal level work requirements for Medicaid because it's been found not to be related to the purpose of the program, which is really designed to give people affordable health care. So this would impose those for the first time to specifically adults in the Medicaid expansion group. A high estimate of adults that could lose coverage through this is over 500 million. It really depends on the ability for, I think, the sort of social service systems to be able to effectively match data and be able to ensure that people don't kind of slip through the cracks of eligibility. One issue that has happened with work reporting requirements with programs in general, and specifically through a pilot program during which states were allowed for the first time at the state level to impose work reporting requirements on Medicaid, is that a lot of people who should have been eligible for exemptions instead sort of fell through the cracks and didn't receive exemptions and so lost access to the program. Another major element of these proposals is to restrict Medicaid coverage for lawfully residing immigrants, and specifically folks who are in the country for humanitarian reasons, so including asylees, refugees, people who are here under a program called humanitarian parole. The Senate would actually just exclude all of those lawfully residing immigrants from the Medicaid program. The House bill would actually reduce the federal funding share specifically for this group of immigrants who are here under what's called humanitarian parole. And technically, as it's currently written, the understanding is that that would actually trigger a state law in North Carolina that would end Medicaid expansion entirely in the state, because we have a trigger law that says if the federal cost share, reduces, then Medicaid expansion ends. And as I'm sure everybody knows, we only expanded Medicaid about a year ago, and this would eliminate coverage for, there's currently, it's probably grown since the last time that I looked, but currently around 670,000 people who are enrolled. So it would really, be catastrophic to take that away. There's also some very wonky ways in which the proposals would limit the options for states to fund Medicaid and shift more costs instead onto people who are receiving care. So it restricts states from raising kind of taxes called provider taxes, which are a key source of funding for the program, and also limits the state's ability to kind of set payments for healthcare providers in order to ensure that they're being compensated adequately for care and then able to provide it. I included in parentheses the wonkier terms for folks who are kind of familiar with this and interested in the details. But I think the main takeaway is that there are just restrictions on ways that the state was previously able to raise money to pay for Medicaid. And it would also introduce co-pays for certain kinds of healthcare for people enrolled in Medicaid expansion. So shifting that cost onto people seeking care, which is likely both to kind of create financial burden and to just reduce care that people are accessing as well. And thinking about the local impacts of those, one major concern is the effect on rural hospitals, which tend to disproportionately rely on funding that they receive through the Medicaid program. There are 7 rural hospitals in the state that have been kind of identified as at immediate risk of closure because of just financial instability that they're already facing. And so obviously the closure of those hospitals then harms access to health care for everybody in those areas, regardless of whether they're enrolled in Medicaid or not. The same as with the SNAP work requirements, there's really a major anticipated burden on local social service offices at the county level. And that would result not only just in challenges and stress for staff and for funding for those offices, but also for delays in care. And then another issue is that Medicaid can serve as a key source of funding for schools, specifically in the services that they provide for children with disabilities, and to kind of fill gaps that aren't filled by other sources of federal funding. So there's certain kinds of care and services are mandated for students with disabilities through a policy called IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, but only about 10% of those services are actually funded through that IDEA funding stream, and so billing Medicaid for some of those services is a really important way for schools to kind of try to fill in the gaps, and so they would be affected, in that way as well. And the last major area I'm going to talk about is sort of the direct effects on public education, or some of the more kind of direct effects. So there is for folks that are familiar with opportunity scholarships, which are the private school voucher program in North Carolina, which uses public funds to fund vouchers for private schools to people regardless of their income level in the state. There's an interesting way in which private vouchers are being supported through the federal budget proposals as well, which is through a tax shelter rather than through any direct funding for vouchers. So these provisions would give folks dollar for dollar tax credits if they make donations to organizations that use those donations to provide vouchers for private schools. And this could be for up to $5 billion per year nationally. This would mean those donations are worth 3 times as much, in terms of the tax benefit of a charitable donation that, to any other any other charitable institution or 501c3 organization. So it would make them, far more valuable than other charitable donations. And the proposal would also exclude or would exempt donations of stock for these vouchers from capital gains tax. So that is another major incentive for very wealthy people to shelter the wealth that they have in stock from taxes by donating them to these kind of voucher organizations. And they would also have to be available to families earning up to 300% of the area median income, which is just to say they would be available to households that are quite wealthy. So there's in no way are they restricted to low-income households. They would actually have to be available for a wide range of incomes, including high-income households. And then another form of cuts in the bills that would affect schools are for clean energy credits that were specifically directed to schools to be able to make energy upgrades, as well as invest in things like solar panels to be able to generate renewable energy on site. These are credits that were put in place by the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. And many schools are kind of relying on them for infrastructure and cost savings, and can help not only modernize buildings, but reduce long-term costs, energy costs, for example, that school districts and buildings face, as well as create healthier environments for students to learn in. And so when we think about the kind of cascading impacts of these changes, expansions in vouchers would, if they're leading to more children leaving public school systems to attend private schools, drain public funding from those schools. And we do have state level analysis that was conducted by the Office of State Budget and Management here in North Carolina about the Opportunity Scholarship Program, finding that it would likely lead, the latest expansion would likely lead to the public school system losing almost $100 million in the upcoming school year. And so again, a further expansion of vouchers that we would anticipate would kind of deepen those harms. And then I think around the clean energy cuts, not only is that like a loss of the potential gains that schools could have seen, but it creates a lot of financial uncertainty, as schools and districts were often sort of mid-plan based on like understanding that these programs would be able to support them. And so it can really destabilize finances for those to be kind of pulled out midstream. I'm gonna turn now to talking a little bit more about the state context. And I'll just remind folks that if you have questions about anything, you're welcome to use the Q&A function and drop in a question. And I can either get to it immediately if it's easy, or return to it at the end. But there is a really important opportunity for our state to prepare for likely federal cuts. I want to emphasize it's both really important to try to stop as many of these federal cuts. The federal budget has not passed. There's a really important opportunity to speak out to try to prevent as much as possible for this harm from being done. But it is likely that there will be some significant cuts that shift costs onto states and onto counties that do pass in the federal budget. And the most important way for our state to prepare for that is by pausing state tax cuts that are currently scheduled to go into effect that are, mean that our state has less revenue to be able to, kind of be resilient in the face of shifts in federal funding. So we're currently facing a revenue shortfall in North Carolina, resulting from over a decade of tax cuts, specifically to the personal income tax and to the corporate income tax that have been going into place since 2013 and are scheduled to continue at least 5 years into the future, if not further. I'm just going to go over this chart quickly. This shows the personal income tax rate in blue and the corporate income tax rate in orange, and what's kind of currently in law as far as those tax rates. So the personal income tax rate is currently scheduled to fall to just under a 3% rate in 2030. And the corporate income tax rate is currently scheduled to be fully eliminated by 2030. So that means that there would be, profitable corporations would pay zero in state income taxes on the profits that they make in North Carolina. And the result of these not only is to harm state revenue, but also really to disproportionately benefit the wealthy, and in the case of the corporate income tax, wealthy shareholders that live outside of North Carolina. And so these cuts are currently in law, to go forward into the future, but it is not too late for our legislature to pause those cuts to maintain the rates that we have currently and to protect some of the revenue, that our state needs to continue to provide services that help everyone thrive. So when we think about, the cost of these tax cuts, what's currently scheduled would reduce state revenues by about $1 billion in 2026 and over $12 billion by 2031, that number could actually end up being much higher. And currently, as far as the state budget is concerned, we have seen budget proposals both from the state House and the state Senate. Whenever I'm talking about the federal budget, I try to be really careful about naming that I'm saying state House and state Senate when I return to talking about our state. So hopefully I'll keep getting it right. So we've seen proposals, budget proposals, both from the state Senate and the state House. Neither of them make, meaningful change, and in some cases make it worse as far as these tax cuts are concerned. So the Senate's proposed budget would actually deepen cuts to the personal income tax, so drive that rate even lower. The House did come up with a proposal to potentially slow those cuts, but not actually to do what we think is really the most important, which is to pause them and say, no tax cuts while we're not able to pay for the full services that our state needs. And again, I think this, especially in the context of the federal cuts that are likely on their way, further reducing state revenue just puts our state in a really kind of hard position. And I do also just want to emphasize that because of our flat personal income tax, cuts to that tax rate mean that the benefits really go, the majority of the benefits go to the richest people in the state. And I saw a question in the Q&A. We are going to share this PowerPoint, so we'll follow up by email with that. And then I think there's also a good question about sort of messaging with business owners and corporations that maybe we can return to in the later Q&A. I want to pass it over now to Todd, who's going to talk a little bit more about opportunities for action and important kind of legislators to contact.
Thanks, Logan, and good to see everybody. For those of you that I don't know, my name's Todd Warren. I'm a former K-5 public school teacher and parent, and I currently work with Down Home, North Carolina. We do work, year-round work with a member-based organization in 10 rural North Carolina counties. And Logan, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen. So I think I can do that here. And we're going to go over just a few steps that folks can take. And I'm going to put in the chat, the document that I'm working from is here. Everything I'm going to cover is in there, and like Logan said, we'll send out the recording and the slides to folks afterwards. Just want to address off the bat, because actually I got an email while this call was that somebody didn't feel like the call is nonpartisan. We're trying to be as fair and balanced as possible to just tell you what we know. And the impacts that could be coming down to counties. This just happens to be where we're at in the particular part of the process. So my recommendations of if you are a county official or local elected, what to do with this information, because we do actually just have a very short window of time, like Logan put up on the congressional budget timeline. The Senate could be voting any day now. And what we know is that proposals are changing daily. The big conversations are on Medicaid, SNAP, schools, and energy tax credits, like Logan just went over. And while the bill is still in the U.S. Senate, which is where it is right now, the priority should be to contact Senator Tillis. We have two U.S. senators, Senator Tom Tillis and Ted Budd. Contacting both of them is important. Senator Tillis is the senior North Carolina senator with considerable leadership in the Senate and has been the most vocal about the concerns raised in this presentation. And there's linked to two news articles there. One from NBC News that he warned the Senate caucus that they will suffer losses in 2026. This is his words. And that in second article in the Hill. This is actually a talking point we've heard from Senator Tillis's office, that nobody's going to lose health care, and that they're only going after, quote, waste, fraud, and abuse. This is a talking point we've heard over and over again. But Senator Tillis's office earlier in the year, aides let us know that nobody was going to lose access to health care. And yesterday he was quoted in the Hill saying in a Senate congressional meeting that there is potentially going to be 600,000 North Carolinians, 3 million people nationwide that could lose access to health care, warning against that. So the time to contact him is now. What do you say when you contact a senator? We've put together a sample call script, but certainly you should make it your own. This just covers a few talking points from today, but the real point would be to talk about how it's going to affect your county. And we think in particular, elected officials and Senator Tillis in particular would be receptive to hearing from rural North Carolina counties. His phone numbers are here. This is both for the Washington, D.C. and then the Raleigh and Charlotte offices, as well as fax numbers are listed here. And you can send an email to this email contact form here. But given the short time frame, I would also recommend directly emailing Senator Tillis's aides, which are all listed here in the document. These are the people that will get your messages to him. And if you are a local decision maker or a budget maker in your county, whether you're on the school board, a county commissioner, maybe a superintendent or a county manager, whatever part of the local budget process that you're involved in, let them know that you would like to speak to the senator before the vote. Time is short, but you are the people that will be directly impacted, and they should be hearing and thinking through the potential drill down impacts like that Logan mentioned for your county. If you are so inclined, we have 2 petitions that we will be delivering to senator and other decision makers. Those petitions are here, one on focused on public ed and the other benefits that Logan mentioned, and one just on Medicaid. I forgot to mention, and of course, after the Senate vote, then we should switch over to House reps, because the bill will be back in the House, and that contact information is linked there. After this call, one of the best ways, given the short time frame and the social media nature of all things of the world that we live in, would be to film a direct camera video with the same message that you called the senator with. And there's just a quick little guide. And mostly is that you don't have to be an expert, and be yourself. Name who you are and what your concerns are for your county, and then tag your U.S. senators and representatives, as well as your state reps too. They should be advocating for you on this, along with the tax cut info that Logan mentioned that the state is considering. And then finally, if you need more drill down information, the people that were invited to this call, we know that you guys are dug in on local budgets. Many of you are local budget experts in your own right. And we tried to put together some fact sheets for each of the issues covered to get you some additional information, both on Medicaid and SNAP. That's largely from a presentation that North Carolina DHHS did the other day. Information on the federal private school voucher program, energy tax credits in schools, and then finally, if you're from Western North Carolina, the congressional budget impacts on WNC and lien-related relief. So that are the action steps that we have for you today. Happy to answer questions about that, but also I think we're ready to move over to some just general Q&A. I'm going to put the action steps back in the chat so you have that link, and then happy to open it up for general Q&A. Logan, you want to let them know how to use the Q&A function here?
Yes. So here, I'll just put my slides back up in case it's helpful to return to them. Okay. Y'all see that slide that says questions?
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A from Roxana with Public School Strong.
Yes. So I see one around, I actually want to return to an earlier question around approaching corporate CEOs or business leaders to invest in the community in terms of investing in children and the future infrastructure that they rely on. This is actually something that at the Budget and Tech Center we have been working on, and there are some, especially small business leaders, who have been really vocal in saying that they're not seeing benefits from the corporate income tax cuts, even though they're providing the majority of jobs in our state, and that they also rely on a strong education system and infrastructure. I think for anybody that has relationships with business leaders who could be interested in delivering those messages, I think the best thing to do is to just have that conversation with them actually and ask them if they're interested in taking a stand. And, that could involve writing an op-ed, letters to the editor, direct communication with legislators, social media content. And so I can follow up with my contact information will be shared as well. And so you can follow up directly with me if you're interested in that. And I can also add any resources that could be useful into that doc that Todd shared. I'm going to go to the other. So one procedural question around, based on the timeline shared in the beginning for this budget, and if there are not enough senators, if senators will not pass the bill as it currently stands, how would that change the timeline? I think that the initial, the first opportunity to lengthen the timeline is to just get it pushed back to a final vote being in August rather than being before July 4th. So that's the first kind of opportunity to extend it. And then there could be a further extension beyond that, sort of depending on if they decide to raise the debt ceiling and do some stopgap measures, is my understanding. In terms of what would happen next, I mean, in order for them to pass a budget bill, they need to come up with a bill that will get a majority of votes, both in the House and in the Senate, and that President Trump will sign. So I can't say what exactly would happen next, but if they can't come up with enough, Senate votes to pass the proposals that they currently have, what they're going to have to do is kind of go back to negotiations to figure out what's feasible. So I'm not sure if that's a totally satisfying answer, but I do think that it's important that the longer that its passage is delayed is more of an opportunity for us to speak up and to let legislative leaders know that the really harmful aspects of these proposals are not acceptable and are going to really harm our communities. So delay is, if we want, for those of us who want to see these proposals changed to not cause harm, delay is good. Let me see. And another question about when this would all start. There's actually when the various provisions in the federal proposals would go into place. It actually depends based on the different policy proposals. So some of them would go into place essentially immediately. Some of them might take a couple of years, and that's actually part of some of the negotiations, is my understanding, that are going on right now with elements that the Senate is trying to include. Is, for example, how much of a heads up do states need to get before they're asked to pay for 20% of SNAP benefits, for example. So there are some additional resources that we can share that go into further detail about it. But the short answer is it depends. And Todd, please jump in at any point if there's something you want to add.
You're doing great.
And I think there were, yeah, some questions about, from Roxana about like opportunities to like, how can we best kind of relay these messages? I think that, Todd shared ideas for directly contacting legislators. I think that in terms of messages for legislators, it's very helpful to, again, bring in like your personal experience and the impact kind of based on your expertise and like the role that you have at the local level. Roxana had also had a question about like, what if we could have just 3 words to describe the effect of these cuts? I can't give you just 3 words, but I think the very shortest version of the message is it's unacceptable to cut food assistance and healthcare in order to pay for tax cuts for wealthy people. That's like the shortest possible version of why these current proposals aren't acceptable and would harm North Carolina. And I think if there was also a question about like what types of town halls could folks organize, or how can you connect with folks to communicate what's happening? If you have ideas of things that you want to do in your community, I think that Todd, like my understanding is Down Home can probably be a resource if they want to reach out to you all. You're also welcome to reach out to me, and I can connect you to our like advocacy lead staff. And we may be able to support with like materials and things like that. But I think that it's it's also kind of good to rely on your own expertise about like what's going to kind of reach your community most effectively. I think that I've covered, the questions that were currently in the Q&A. Are there other questions that folks have? I'm going to give it a minute because I know sometimes it can take a minute.
And while folks are doing that, one of the reasons we're hosting this webinar today is to this webinar is geared towards people at the local county level that are budget decision makers, whether you're school board, superintendent, county commissioners, and the like, or staff there. We're going to share this information back out with the folks that attended today, and share it with your other local electeds. Make sure that they're aware. As I was getting ready for this, I talked to a couple superintendents and county commissioners, and they pointed out that with the complexity of all the budget processes, the local, state, and federal, and kind of like where they're all at right now, that this may not be on everybody's radar to have kind of thought through the impacts. And so sharing this out could be very helpful. Look, do you see any other questions here?
I didn't see any other specific questions in the Q&A.
Right.
So we're also okay to wrap up just a few minutes early.
Yeah, great.
I'm gonna just very quickly, we would actually also really love at the Budget and Tax Center, we are currently trying to make sure that we gather feedback about our presentations. So I would love if folks have time to fill out a very, very quick evaluation form that I can drop in the chat. I'm bad at multitasking, so I'll do it in just a moment.
And I see the question about the Western North Carolina. I'm going to adjust the settings on that right now while we're here.
Cool, thank you. And then there's also a variety, if you're interested in information from the Budget and Tax Center, we publish a lot of analysis of the state budget and state policy proposals, and then some around the federal budget as well. And we're trying to make sure that we can make sure that folks have access to resources that can help them kind of understand the impact of the federal budget, excuse me, on their on their local communities and how they can kind of take action around that. So yeah, there's a easy way to do that is just to sign up for your just to sign up for our email address. Oh, I did also see there are a couple of raised hands. If folks are able to put questions into the Q&A, that would be the best way to do that. And then I do also just want to make sure that folks have contact information for me and for Todd. If you have follow-up questions or again want to reach out about sort of ideas about how to share this information in your community. I want to wait one more minute for any other questions that come up. Thank you, Todd, for updating that Western NC doc. And I will also make sure to drop some information into the kind of main document that Todd shared about taking action regarding contacting your state legislators as well. So there's some kind of easy messages that folks can use. I think with that, I will go ahead and close us out. I'm really grateful, to Down Home for inviting me to present on this webinar, and to everybody who showed up and for the work that you do in your local communities as well. So yeah, thank you so much for being here, and thank you in advance for taking action as well.
Great, thanks so much. Good to see everybody.